IVM.
Hello, we're Team Explainer. Welcome to an all-new episode of Press Decode, a weekly podcast where we take Explainer's mission to declutter the news one step further. Check out our newsletter for more stories and follow us at Explainer Inc. to keep up with all the fun things we planned for our Explainer fam. So sit back, relax, and don't let the news give you the blues. I'm Sarah, your host for the day, and today it's just me and Wagda. The Rona has really been striking Explainer, and that's why we've been out of action or back only in pairs since the year began. Like always, we have 3 segments for you. In our big story, we're talking about the whole controversy around the acquittal of former Bishop Franco Mulakkal on charges of repeatedly raping a nun. In our Food for Thought segment, we're going to pit modern development against old-world charms of historical cities, keeping Purani Dilli as our central theme. Finally, we will be roasting and toasting our fave and least fave items. All right, so let's begin with our big story. On Friday, January 14th, former Bishop Franco Mulakkal was acquitted on charges of repeatedly raping a nun. The history of the case reveals the rot inside the Catholic Church in India, while the ruling exposes the deep-seated misogyny of our male judges. Allow me to recap the case for you before we get into it. In January 2018, a senior nun filed an FIR in Kerala alleging that Franco Mulakkal, the then bishop of the Jalandhar diocese, had raped her at least 13 times between 2014 and 16. The allegations included being forced to perform unnatural sex, which is legal code for anal or oral intercourse. And this, for anyone wondering, came after she spent over a month filing complaints with church leaders, including Cardinal Mar George Alangeri, the senior-most Catholic priest of the country, and the Vatican envoy to India, but to no avail. Mulakkal, in retaliation, alleged that the rape allegation was fabricated and part of a conspiracy to bring him down. He also claimed that the accuser was motivated by revenge. Why, you may ask? In 2016, her cousin filed a complaint with the church alleging that she was having an illicit affair with the cousin's husband. In response, Mulakkal then stripped her of all senior responsibilities. The accuser eventually drew the support of a group of nuns who launched a hunger strike demanding the arrest of the bishop. Their order, Missionaries of Jesus, instead ordered a probe into the 6 nuns, including the accuser. Mulakkal was eventually stripped of his pastoral duties in September 2018 and arrested soon after, but he got bail within a month. And if all of this wasn't enough, in October 2018, one of the key prosecution witnesses, Father Kyriakos, was found dead in Mulakkal's diocese in Jalandhar, raising questions of foul play. According to Kyriakos, many nuns had complained about Mulakkal. The trial finally began only in September 2020, after months of Mulakkal doing his best to get the charges dismissed, including moving the Supreme Court. It concluded on January 10th, 2022, and the ruling was pronounced on Friday, January 14th, with the judge acquitting Mulakkal. So, Wagda, what are your thoughts on the most unlikely acquittal?
Honestly, I'm not going to talk about whether he should have been acquitted or not. But can we please talk about how flawed the reasons of the acquittal are?
Yes.
In a nearly 300-page order, Additional Sessions Judge G. Gopakumar ignored many previously set standards of proofs and evidence in cases of sexual assault. First, victim shaming. The court basically said, why didn't she speak up before? I mean, it happened 13 times, right? That she wasn't forthcoming enough.
Of course.
Second, the judge narrowly focused on proof of penile penetration, noting that she did not mention it in her initial statement to the police or the doctors. The medical examination, in fact, includes descriptions of being forced to touch Mulakkal's genitalia, and that he did the same to her. Regardless of whether she mentions penile penetration, a rape case is made out under the circumstances and under the new amendments of 2013. Rape is not just defined as a penile vaginal act. Oral and anal acts are all included in the definition. The key is consent, not the act. Third, he uses this lack of mention in the first report to reject the entirety of her testimony, saying it's inconsistent. The court seems to have applied the principle falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus, which means false in one thing, false in everything, to reject the nun's testimony.
See, I actually have very little to say because I'm not surprised, but I'm still utterly surprised. But ये सही है, मतलब Latin में कुछ भी बोल दो तो this guy gets away with saying anything.
Okay, but no, I mean, there are a lot of other legal principles in Latin also, you know.
I mean, just let me have this one.
Basically, so the precedent is on the law of evidence here is something else. It is that the evidence of a witness is not to be discarded totally, even if some aspects of it are unbelievable, exaggerated, or inaccurate. According to the Supreme Court, and I quote, it is the duty of the court to separate grain from chaff. Where chaff can be separated from grain, it would be open to the court to convict an accused, notwithstanding the fact that evidence has been found to be deficient or to be not wholly credible. Falsity of material particular would not ruin it from beginning to end. Especially in rape cases, a victim's testimony must be accepted unless it contains material inconsistencies. Even if you consider that penile penetration she did not mention earlier, the rest of the FIR still establishes a rape case.
Yeah.
So anyway, fourthly, and this is the most enraging bit, the character assassination. So the court focused on the complaint filed by the accuser's cousin about that affair, whether it was true or not. The cousin has since taken back the complaint, admitting that it was false and based on a misunderstanding. But the court took it as valid evidence. As to what exactly? I mean, how is an affair relevant to her case of rape?
I want to bring in here that, like you pointed out, it's not that this matters, but the affair itself was proven or was taken back as not happened, like as something that didn't happen.
Oh no, but the court said, no, why would this person with such a standing make jokes about this? She would not file a false complaint. I mean, first of all, it's not even relevant. Like, you're supposed to talk about evidence which is relevant. This is the first thing that you're taught in like evidence law. I don't know what year we live in really, because the rape laws have been harping on how the victim's character is not to be analyzed by court. It's literally violating Section 53A of the Evidence Act, which states that in rape cases, the character and past sexual experiences of the woman are irrelevant. And here we are. The nun's testimony is out because of inconsistency, but evidence to her affairs is in. Great.
Moving beyond the acquittal, the case in itself, however, is a landmark moment for Catholics in India especially. While on the one hand, it revealed the ugly misogyny of leading members of the Catholic community in Kerala especially, including an MLA who declared back in 2018, is there any doubt that the nun is a prostitute? 12 times it was pleasure, 13 times it becomes rape. Where was she when it happened 12 times? Who is she telling this to? Why did she not complain on the first time it happened? Let the other 3 sisters be examined. Let us see if they are holy. So that was one side that was this. But on the other hand, and this I feel is more important, it was also the first time that Catholic nuns in the country flouted their holy vows to defy the church. And this counts not just the accuser, but also the 5 other nuns who decided to stand by her come what may. And that's a big, big deal, considering the fact that if Mulakkal had been found guilty, he would have been the first Catholic bishop convicted of rape in the country.
I have hope there.
And the conviction...
it's going to the High Court.
It is.
Yeah.
And the conviction would have been based on the courage of the nun who decided to speak up despite joining the church at the tender age of 15 and being part of the system since. I mean, at 15, you're too young to have understood consent, and you've just been in the same system since. And to make matters worse, the News Minute rightly points out that unlike many other women with the means to connect to a wider network for support, nuns either have no such support system or a smaller system that is restricted to the convent, especially when they stand up against an authoritative figure. They're forced to continue to live in the same hostile environment of abuse and ostracization like the survivor nun. And I think the very extent and importance of this can be noted in what the accuser wrote to the ambassador of the Pope. From childhood, we've been taught to believe that the church is our mother. But in the light of my experience, I'm beginning to think that the church is a stepmother to women and laity. And it's precisely this, right? It's almost impossible for female clergy, especially, to speak out. Their first instinct is never to approach higher authorities. And even in this case, after the accuser first confessed to a fellow nun, their first instinct was simply to pray. And this isn't without reason. A New Delhi-based theologian knows celibacy is a cornerstone of Catholic religious life, as is sexual purity amongst nuns. Many nuns say a sister who admits to a sexual experience, even if it's forced, faces the risk of isolation within her order and possibly even expulsion. You're just not sure if you're going to be kept in your congregation because so much is about your vow of chastity.
This I find so shocking. I mean, sexual experience, even if it is forced, it might result in you getting expelled.
I mean, I want to say I'm angered, not shocked, which is somehow worse.
Yeah.
I'm not shocked. And the church's laws inherently work against women in their intrinsic patriarchy. The women are trained not to question the church, and considering, like I pointed out, they join at a very young age, they're often not even aware that these religious institutions very much constitute a workplace, and thus they're protected by sexual harassment laws.
It would never strike me.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, it's also like, which other workplace tells you not to have sex with someone or like, makes rules about your sexual whatever experiences.
But I guess, despite the hope that we still hold out, one judgment swaying either way is unlikely to change the larger system that currently means women who report abuse with hostility and hostility alone.
Yeah. On that note, we come to the end of our first segment. We'll be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network.
सफर, रास्ते, मंजिल और मुकाम अक्सर ये हमसे कुछ कहना चाहते हैं, पर हम हैं कि अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में इन्हें सुनने से कतराते हैं। नमस्ते दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है केशव चतुर्वेदी और मैं आपको ले चलूंगा कुछ ऐसे सफर पर जहां आपको एक नया नजरिया मिलेगा सफर और मंजिलों को देखने का। आइए इन किस्से कहानियों में डूब जाएं, हर मंगलवार और शुक्रवार।
Hello and welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network. We're Team Splainer and make sure you follow us at SplainerIn on Instagram and Twitter to keep up with the Splainer fam. This time for food for thought, we're going to Old Delhi or Purani Dilli, Urf Shahjahanabad, the land of Chandni Chowk, Kinari Bazaar, Jama Masjid, Jain temples, Shadi shopping, Mirza Ghalib, and so much more. So tell me what comes to your mind when I say Purani Dilli.
Okay, two things. One, during Ramzan, going and hogging. And second, the horrors of going shadi shopping. Like,
oh yes,
I just go with very picky people and it's a bad ride.
Oh yes, there's so much for me. Like Ghalib's Haveli, the view from the terrace of the spice market that looks over the Fatehpuri Masjid's courtyard, Moti Cinema, and don't get me started on the food.
Yes. Please get started on the food.
Japanese samosa. Have you heard of Japanese samosa?
Excuse me? How have I not had this? What is this?
Have you had a khaja? The Odia khaja?
No.
So it actually looks like a fan.
Okay.
Like an open book, with like pages like this it's like a fan. Think of it as a fan. And it's a fried samosa with like some filling inside and a lot of like the crispy bit. So like a normal samosa, but a lot more crispy.
So the filling is what?
Aloo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's some story there. Some weird story. We went near like Moti Cinema. I think there are a few shops there that have like a story behind them. I'm forgetting it now, but you should check it out when you go.
The person who took you for your tour is going to be so embarrassed.
I still remember all the food. I don't remember the story. So...
Moving on,
yes. Japanese samosa. Then there is Daulat ki chaat. There's chai and parathe wali gali. Hello.
Yes.
But like, see, I have always gone there kind of like a tourist. I mean, I've lived half my life in Delhi, but I've still gone there as a tourist. So every time I go, I try to imagine the life of those whose business or, lives are literally tied to these areas. Purani Dilli is Shahjahanabad, the walled city that was built by Shah Jahan in 1639. It had 14 gates of entry that will sound very familiar to many. Kashmiri Gate, Ajmeri Gate, Dilli Gate, Lahori Gate, etc. It had specialized bazaars that were common in medieval Indian cities, like the Meena Bazaar for women's clothes, Urdu Bazaar that was once dedicated to literature, and the Johari Bazaar for jewelry. It was a new city then, but after the British took over, they built Lutyens Delhi, which is New Delhi now. Shahjahanabad was relegated to being called the Purani Dilli. So if you visited Old Delhi, it's really crowded. Like really crowded. If you're on the main Chandni Chowk road, that leads from the Red Fort to the Fatehpuri Masjid, you can get to places faster if you walk rather than if you took a vehicle. Cycle rickshaws may be good competition to walking though. Then there is smoke and garbage. And I have the patience to deal with it once in a while. I went like 2 years ago. So for locals, I think, whose life would be difficult, it would be good news that Shahjahanabad Redevelopment Corporation and the Delhi Public Works Department together decided on development project under the Master Plan of Delhi 2021. This same Chandni Chowk Road, which is the central artery of Chandni Chowk, is now a 1.4 kilometer stretch of which is only meant for pedestrians. It's paved with red sandstone and granite and is peppered with benches and plants and CCTVs. Oh, it's like modern. So good news, is it?
Okay, so I don't know, and I'm taking our segment's name very seriously and only have food for thought, no real concrete answers. Because same as you, Vagda, I too have the most romanticized and peak tourist view of Purani Dilli. Sure, I stayed in the capital for almost a decade, but it was far out and we only went to the old city for either shopping or food, and the noise and the crowd was all part of it. But reading this recent piece in the Mint that I'm going to link below called Inside a Dilli, Straddling Past and Future, had me suddenly notice the glaring otherization that we fall prey to while writing about places like this. There is this dichotomy that we create between the old and the present, where one side is all for development and the so-called modern facade of things, and the other is awed by the spirit and sound and colors of these old towns. Yes, peak white girl behavior, if I may.
Yes.
I'm guilty as charged. But like Vagda pointed out, the crowded Central Road is now a no traffic zone. The old city of Shahjahanabad is now cosmopolitan, and it's no more the town that the Mughals built, obviously. Some shopkeepers have decided to remodel their stores after the revamp to match the sleek South Delhi markets. And it was all about the modernization instead of preserving the old structures. A demolition drive was carried out, metal and glass showrooms were designed and constructed along the main road. And thus came the uproar about the spirit of the city being lost.
Were you part of that uproar?
No, I wasn't. Thankfully, a few years down the line, I was smarter than what I was. But here's my question, and I don't necessarily have an answer to it. But both the development and the idea of this old town charm are being imposed on those who live in Old Delhi by people who very much do not. And that's a trickier question of development, right? Because there is never going to be one answer. There are going to be people who will willingly change with the times and want the swanky looking cafes and showrooms. And there are going to be people like a resident whom the Mint interviewed who says, there's nothing wrong with it. You have to keep up with the times. But don't you think these modern designs will one day take away what Purani Dilli is all about? I think it's that road's doing. But there's also going to be businessmen like the one who runs a cafe that now serves sandwiches, shakes, and mocktails, unlike the rest of your Purani Dilli fanfare, so none of your Japani samosas. To keep up with the times, who simply says, it's the government's job to take care of the city's history and infrastructure, not ours. I don't quite know how one can balance the old and the new, but it sure was eye-opening for me to realize the outsider's gaze that I've had on an entire locality for the longest time.
Yeah, it's true. But you know what, that makes you think, how do other heritage cities deal with the question of development? Surely this is not the only heritage city in the world, right? Indian conservationists think Puducherry is actually a good model for comparison. It's still a good model for restoration, where authorities have managed to retain the indigenous architectural design while making the French and Tamil quarters shine. We've also seen good restoration work at the Ahmedabad Walled City and Fort Kochi.
Yes.
Which I love, by the way. So cool. But we can also look at all the old European cities like Venice, Paris, Rome. The streets there have these old buildings that are in so much better condition than our Purani Dilli. Poor Purani Dilli, whose streets are lined with thousands of wires hanging over, where an old Haveli is next door to a newly painted metal modern-looking cafe. These European cities have strict laws on what you can or cannot do to heritage buildings. You can't even air dry your clothes out in the balcony, which I don't approve of. I live in Rajasthan. It's practically criminal to not use the sun to dry out your clothes here. But think of how these cities don't escape the development versus preservation conversations either, you know? I'm thinking of the Louvre Pyramid. The Louvre was founded in 1793. And the old building is beautiful. But the glass pyramid in the courtyard, that was not part of the setup till 1989. 2 centuries after the French Revolution, a Chinese American architect designed the pyramid to increase the area of the entrance to the museum so that it's easier for the visitors to enter. And now it is the largest and the main entrance to the museum. But does it fit in? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, and were Parisians okay with it? Nope. They all hated it. Critics called it a house of the dead. An architectural historian said that, and I'm quoting, it was perceived as the eruption of a foreign object. And what is more, an American object. It has to be seen also in the framework of France and anti-Americanism, which is sort of a permanent position. End quote. So the pyramid was basically Emily in Paris.
How proud are you of this joke?
I am so proud of this joke. But like over the years, Parisians have come to absorb the pyramid. I'm not going to say what's in store for Emily though. A similar conversation happened around the time when the Notre Dame Cathedral was destroyed by fire in 2019. Questions like these arose. Should the cathedral be rebuilt exactly as it was? Or should this be an opportunity to build something wild and new? Should there be a greenhouse on the roof? Point is, it all comes down to how architecture is political. You can't take the politics out of anything. But in India's case, it's not just politics. It's also the lack of trained engineers and restoration professionals. And if you would have some laws that, set the standard for how much development you can do or what you can or cannot do to a heritage building, that would help. And in general, there is a lack of community support in preserving built heritage.
I mean, last week we carried a news item that said a prehistoric rock was vandalized in the US. Every piece of built heritage has that in India. I mean, it's a joke.
Yeah, I don't even know how that was news. That was like literally every monument in India.
Exactly. Anyway, on that note, we come to the end of this segment. We will be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, writer-director Supan Verma tells Cyrus what it was like co-directing Season 2 of The Family Man. In their new miniseries Ek Sawal Kahi Jawab, the Pulyabazi hosts ask, how much should the government's tax income be? What's life like in your 40s? Actor Sikandar Kher talks to Ritasha and Ayushi on Agla Station Adulthood. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folks shed light on a probable global treaty for pandemic management. And on Say No to Drama, Chetna explains how to give up on the stress of not finding solutions to our problems right away. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. We really do appreciate the word of mouth. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms that you're listening to us on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is. And we are also on YouTube. On YouTube, you can check out our various channels on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda and CoinSwitch Kuber. Thank you for making this possible.
Welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network. It's time for our final segment this week, Roast or Toast. And I see you have a least fave item, Bhagda.
Yeah. 2 weeks after I announced I am head of positivity at Press Decode.
Oh, you did?
I'm really embracing the hate in this episode for everything. I think maybe it's the corona. Anyway, so Erwin Schrödinger, the physicist dude who's known for the thought experiment involving a cat.
Physicist dude. Yes.
Physicist dude. Now we know that he was a pedophile.
Ugh.
He targeted and often groomed and abused girls as young as 12 and kept a record in his diaries. Schrödinger's biographers describe him as a male supremacist who felt entitled to these girls' bodies because he was a genius. I don't think I need to say more.
Yeah. Moving on swiftly. I guess New Year, new me. Yes, I am aware we're 20 days into the new year. But well, I decided my new year began only after my COVID bout ended.
Yes, valid.
Thank you. Anyway, I have a fave item this week. A new study has found that men and women look more attractive in face masks. The most attractive variety, oddly enough, is the disposable surgical kind. Leaving that, I love this item for a number of reasons. First being the study basically says we're all just really ugly. And that's somehow hilarious to me. Like, it's a study that's saying it. Like, please cover your faces. You'll look better. Second, and most importantly, I know lots of people hate masks, but I have loved them even before COVID. So like I said, I used to stay in Delhi, and well, pollution and asthma don't go well together. So post-Diwali, I would usually be masked up. And this meant a number of people who knew me for years wouldn't recognize me in public. And believe me when I tell you, I loved it. So basically, there's no losing. Mask up, kids.
And that was our show this week. Thank you so much for joining us on Press Decode. You can catch us every Thursday on the IVM Podcasts Network. And guys, please remember, don't let the news give you the blues.
What is the workplace and how does your gender and body affect your right at work? Hey, I'm Priya Mirza, and on the Longest Constitution podcast, we critically examine the vision of the Indian Constitution and laws. In season 1, we looked at sex, gender, sexuality in India, and the landmark judgments which transformed our rights as citizens in this country. In season 2, we discussed the laws which shape the workplace and examine how ability, competence, and merit impact us, and much more. Join me, Priya Mirza, every Wednesday only on the IVM Podcast app, website, and all the major podcast streaming platforms.
Are you looking for finance products and services that can enhance your personal finance experience? Are you looking for a space to talk about your financial product or service? And are you looking for a crisp talk show where the conversation is all about money? Well, your search ends here. Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta and I'm host of the Paisa Vaisa podcast, and I invite you for the conversation about your personal finance on each Monday on the IVM Podcast app or the website or on any podcast streaming platforms. See you folks.